May the 26th, 1940. Along roads lined with their smashed and abandoned equipment, British and French armies retreat to the only channel port still open to them, Dunkirk. 10 miles away, along the Channel coast, German armor awaits Hitler's orders to attack. On the Dunkirk beaches, nearly 500,000 men, British and French, face surrender, or the slim chance of rescue by ships from England.
There were masses of troops, and they came down in a sort of a V shape to a crocodile semi-single file as they got near the water's edge. Of course, many of these soldiers were going out up to their necks in water and climbing into, say, minesweepers that could get in nearly as close as that. Others, of course, on the beach were embarking in the small boats, but there didn't seem to be any panic or worry at all. One came across lots of these small boats, many of them with perhaps even a dozen or so soldiers on board, heading back for England resolutely. One quite often offered to take their crews of soldiers off them so that they could go back for another load, and they said, "No fear, we've got our 12 pongos and we're going back to England with them. You go and get your own."
The beach was, well, you could say thousands of men being on Margate Beach on a bank holiday. The troops was in a pretty bad state. They were in a bad way. There was one man special I shall always remember. He came on board, he'd had his teeth blown out, and he was holding a rifle with a fixed bayonet. And we had to take all the arms away from him. We couldn't shift this gun out of this rifle out of this man's hands. His hands was actually gripped this, and they was fixture. Our chap was on a beach, and then he gets aboard a ship and he thinks he's safe. But they really did think this. They said, "Whoa, England, home and beauty, let us get there, boy."
We were most impressed. They were very tired, and most of them just slumped down and went to sleep then.
Our job was to stop enemy aircraft getting at those troops. Because, believe me, if enemy aircraft had got superiority of the air at Dunkirk, they would have massacred those fellows on the beach. Nothing could have been done. They had no guns, they had no anti-aircraft. And German bombers and German dive bombers, the Stukas, would have just murdered them, and we couldn't have got those troops off. Another thing the Germans tried to do, of course, was to sink the ships. They knew that the fellows couldn't swim out to England. Therefore, they had to try and get on the ships, and if they could sink these ships, then the British Army would have been trapped.
The RAF tried to keep the German Air Force away from the beaches, but 6 destroyers and over 200 craft were sunk. Fighter Command lost nearly half its strength in the French campaign. 100 planes in the Dunkirk operations alone. Dunkirk was a major defeat, but the inspired efforts of the Royal Navy and the little ships saved 330,000 British and French troops. For a week, the weather was fine, and the German army was held off.
I really and truly don't think that they thought they'd ever get them off. That's my opinion. But it was an act of God that they did. The weather was good, the sea was like a mill pond, and this was a great help to everybody. If it had been rough water, you'd have never got them off at Dunkirk, because when those rollers go up that beach, they go.
At any moment, a breakthrough by the German army could have stopped the whole operation. I don't think, despite the valiant endeavors of the British and French troops who were keeping the Germans back, that they could have stopped the might of the German armor getting through if Hitler had so wanted to do it.
What was left of Dunkirk surrendered on June the 4th. Thousands of troops could not be rescued. A fortnight later, France stopped fighting, and the British Prime Minister Churchill broadcast to the world.
What General Weygand has called the Battle of France is over. The Battle of Britain is about to begin. Hitler knows that he will have to break us in this island or lose the war. If we can stand up to him, all Europe may be freed, and the life of the world may move forward into broad, sunlit uplands. But if we fail, then the whole world will sink into the abyss of a new dark age. Let us therefore brace ourselves to our duty. So bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its commonwealths last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour.
Britain prepared to face immediate invasion. A new evacuation of children began from the south and east coast areas where a German landing might be expected. Some parents sent their children overseas to safety. But this was stopped in September when a U-boat sank a British liner with 90 children on board. To guard against invasion, over 1 million men not required by the regular forces volunteered to form the Home Guard. They drilled with broomsticks because there were no rifles to spare, and rehearsed bloodthirsty defenses against a German attack. The regular army's training seems to have impressed the newsreels.
The one-time foot sloggers have turned Kickstarter pushers. Shanks's pony has given way to a spanking motorbike. The left-right blokes have got both feet off the ground at the same time. They're part of Britain's mighty mobile Mounties, all keen welcomers of Adolf when he drops in for a cup of tea and a cream bun. A battalion of infantry on wheels is at exercise, a swift-moving, striking force that would do the enemy a bit of no good. And they learn to take the rough with the smooth under conditions they might meet with on active service. Up and down they go, but unlike the Huns, they're always on the level.
The army had brought back their rifles from Dunkirk, but almost everything else had been abandoned in France. In June, the only fully equipped division in Britain was Canadian.
I remember in June going down to the southeast corner of Britain, where General Thorne was in command. That's to say, Kent, Surrey, Sussex, that sort of area. Certainly a possible landing area for the Germans if they were going to attempt it. And I remember sending a memorandum to Winston, which must be somewhere in his papers. If I remember right, I said something like this: the troops were in very good heart and that they were trained and so forth. But, of course, there is no anti-tank weapon of any kind, no anti-tank gun, and no tanks. That was in the area where, if the Germans were going to land, they might very well be expected to land. That was the state of the cupboard. It was bare.
The king practiced marksmanship and rejoiced that Britain stood alone with no more allies to pamper. The head of fighter command, Sir Hugh Dowding, agreed. He had lost too many planes helping the French. Station names and signposts were removed to baffle invading Germans. The effect was to baffle British travelers. Anti-tank barriers made sure the Germans wouldn't have an easy passage if they advanced along the railways. In the invasion areas, the countryside disappeared under coils of barbed wire. The beaches, too, were wired to below low water mark. J.B. Priestley remembers a visit to the seaside.
I went down one hot summer day, late summer, to one of the seaside resorts, the Kent coast. The last time I visited it, packed out with beaches, absolutely crammed, and all the fun of the fair going on. Then to see it in this strange, bright, empty day, the beaches deserted, a lot of barbed wire all over the place, and I felt then that, in a way, this was a kind of symbol of what people felt, and that they were ready to abandon this for the time being in order to get on with the war.
Churchill was everywhere, no longer a suspect politician, but the living embodiment of the British will to resist. It was a situation he seemed to revel in, describing for colleagues a vivid picture of himself leading a last-man defense of a devastated Whitehall.
Immediately Churchill became Prime Minister, the pace in Whitehall changed. People started not merely to think fast, but to act fast. Distinguished civil servants could be seen running down the passages. Churchill himself was physically very energetic. He would suddenly make the most extraordinary and energetic sorties. He would inspect troops, marching at great speed down the ranks and outpacing all the younger men who were following him. I remember one evening he said that he must go and inspect some new works, and although he was 65 years old, he vaulted over a brick wall and landed feet first in a pool of liquid cement. And with an impertinence, which in retrospect I'm surprised at, I said to him, well, I think you've met your Waterloo, because he was stuck in the cement. And he turned to me and said, how dare you? Anyhow, my Blenheim.
In the arms factories, men and women worked long hours to fill the gaps in British defenses. Production reached a peak in June, then fell as workers tired, but the spurt lasted through the critical time. Production of fighter planes doubled. 100 new Spitfires and Hurricanes a week replenished Dowding's forces. The new Minister of Aircraft Production, Lord Beaverbrook, took care to make ordinary people feel part of the production battle.
My father was a master of propaganda. There was a pots and pans, where everyone was asked to give up pots and pans and railings, and Stanley Baldwin didn't give up his gates, but most of the people gave up everything they could in the way of metal. The pilots, and we all knew that you couldn't make aircraft out of pots and pans, but it was good stuff. It brought the people to realize that it was a desperate situation. The response to the pots and pans was tremendous. They had piles and piles of pots and pans, not knowing what to do with them. But he, as I say, he was a great propagandist.
But where was the German invasion? June 1940, Hitler had not begun to think about invading Britain. He was busy celebrating his French victory and expected Britain, like France, to make peace. Berlin gave him a hero's welcome when he returned there on July the 6th with Admiral Raeder and his other commanders-in-chief. Only the German Navy seemed to have plans for an invasion. By the time Hitler began to take an interest in them, the army had its own plans and was critical of the navies.